If you ever wondered why Calimesa regulates mobile home rents, or what that actually means, you're not alone. It's one of the most complex and misunderstood topics we deal with as a city. There's history behind it, going back to Riverside County's early rent stabilization laws, our incorporation in 1990, and decades of refinements since then. So in this episode, we're going to unpack what the ordinance does, why it exists, and how the process really works, separating facts from frustration and laws from perception. Because when it comes to rent stabilization, understanding the why is just as important as the what.
Welcome to the Calimesa Insider Podcast, the official podcast of the City of Calimesa. Join City Manager Will Kolbow as he takes you behind the scenes of city projects, community stories, and the future of our hometown. Stay informed, stay connected. This is the Calimesa Insider Podcast.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to this Halloween edition of the Calimesa Insider Podcast. I am hoping that this gets posted before our event tonight, but I do hope to see you there at Summerlin Park tonight from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. And if you were there and watching or listening to this episode after the fact, I hope you had a great time. So before we get to our main topic of the day, our next City Council meeting is this Monday, November 3rd at 6 p.m. To give you a bit of a preview, we're starting the evening with a presentation from the Blue Zones Project, which is an initiative focused on improving community health and longevity through environmental and lifestyle changes. You may have heard of the original Blue Zones, regions like Okinawa, Japan, and Loma Linda, California, right here in our own backyard, where people live measurably longer, healthier lives. The presentation will showcase how the Blue Zones model has been implemented in nearby Banning, including things like school and restaurant partnerships, community walking groups, and local policy strategies to make healthier choices easier. On the business agenda, the council will consider a professional services agreement with Jacob Green and Associates to lead the update of the city's strategic plan and conduct an assessment of our mission, vision, and values. This will help guide our organization's priorities over the next several years and ensure we're aligned with community expectations and future needs. As always, you can attend in person at the Norton Young Love Senior Center or watch live on our YouTube channel at calimesa.gov/YouTube. So when people hear that the city of Calimesa regulates mobile home rents, the reaction tends to be mixed. Some are surprised. Wait, the city sets rents? While others are frustrated. Why can't the city just deny the rent increases? Both of those responses are understandable. Mobile home rent stabilization is one of the most complex and often misunderstood areas of local government. So today, I want to walk through how Calimesa's ordinance actually works, why it exists, and how we apply it. And just as importantly, I want to explain that what the city can and can't do under that law, because a lot of people assume because what a lot of people assume are policy choices are actually legal requirements. Now, to understand Calimesa's mobile home rent stabilization ordinance, we have to go back to a time before Calimesa was even a city. Before December 1st, 1990, the date Calimesa officially incorporated, this area was governed by Riverside County. And Riverside County had its own mobile home rent stabilization ordinance in place. That county ordinance, adopted in the early 1980s, created a mobile home rent review commission and established procedures for reviewing rent increases in mobile home parks located in the unincorporated county. It was one of the earliest in Southern California. Back then, mobile home living was a significant part of the local housing market, particularly for seniors and residents on fixed incomes. Rent spikes in mobile home parks were creating real financial pressures, and the county's ordinance was designed to keep space rents stable while allowing park owners to earn a fair and reasonable return. When Calimesa incorporated in 1990, it adopted Riverside County's own code as its own, including that rent stabilization framework. It was a practical decision. Adopting the county code meant continuity. The new city wasn't starting from scratch. It simply was inheriting the same rules that were already applied to local parks. And that's how Chapter 9.05 of the Calimesa Municipal Code came to be. Over time, the city has refined and amended it, most recently through Ordinance 410, adopted earlier this year, but its roots trace back to that original county ordinance. It's also worth noting that around the same time, our neighbor to the north, the city of Yucaipa, incorporated in 1989, and one of the driving issues there was a strong public desire to implement mobile home rent stabilization. So this was a regional issue, not just a Calimesa specific issue. The difference is that Calimesa didn't need to create a new ordinance from scratch. The county already had one, so when we incorporated, it became part of our own municipal code. So one of the foundational features of Calimesa's ordinance is the January 1st, 1990 cutoff date in section 9.05.020. That section says the rent stabilization rules apply only to mobile home park spaces that existed before January 1st, 1990. If a new park was built after that date, or if an existing park expanded by adding new spaces later, those new spaces aren't covered by a rent stabilization. Now, the logic behind that date goes back to the county ordinance. The goal was to protect longtime residents in existing parks while ensuring that future development wouldn't be discouraged. In other words, the ordinance was never meant to freeze every new space in perpetuity. It was meant to stabilize rents for existing homeowners who had already invested in their units, many of whom had limited ability to relocate. So when people ask why certain mobile home parks in Calimesa are covered under the rent stabilization and others are not, that date, January 1st, 1990, is the key. Currently, the city of Calimesa has 1,344 total spaces in 8 mobile home parks. 748 of those spaces fall under the rent stabilization ordinance. There are approximately 200 that are either subject to a long-term lease, are park-owned, or vacant spaces. 349 spaces were constructed after January 1st, 1990, and are therefore exempt from rent stabilization. Now, these numbers don't include Sharondale. So while Sharondale is a mobile home community, it's a subdivision, meaning each home sits on its own lot. So it's not a mobile home park. It's a single-family community consisting of manufactured homes. Calimesa's mobile home rent stabilization ordinance governs how and when a park owner may increase rent charged for a mobile home space. The ordinance doesn't control the sale or ownership of the homes themselves. It regulates space rent, meaning the ground rent paid for the land under the home. The law's purpose is straightforward: to prevent excessive rent increases while ensuring park owners can receive a fair and reasonable return on their property. It sets out clear rules for when rent can be raised, establishes notice requirements, and provides a formal process for requesting additional increases. Under normal circumstances, annual space rent increases are limited to 80% of the increase in the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, during the preceding 12-month period. So, for example, if the CPI increases by 3%, the maximum rent increase would be capped at 2.4%. Chapter 6 of the Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Administrative Rules outlines the procedures used to calculate these annual adjustments and verify the CPI data. If a park owner seeks an increase beyond that annual allowance, for example, to recover major infrastructure costs or to address revenue shortfalls, the owner must file a petition with the city. The most recent update to the ordinance, Ordinance 410, made significant procedural improvements. It didn't change the core protections, but replaced the old rent review board with a hearing officer system. So under the former model, a 5-member volunteer board appointed by the city council would hold hearings on rent increase petitions: 1 resident member, 1 park owner member, and 3 neutral members. That structure worked for a time, but it was cumbersome and inconsistent, and because of the emotions involved, it became increasingly difficult to fill all 5 seats with qualified volunteers. So the new hearing officer model, now used in many California cities, including Yucaipa, brings professional expertise and impartiality. The hearing officer is appointed by the city council for a 3-year term, but acts independently when deciding cases. The city council reviews a petition only if there's an appeal, and even then, its authority is limited to determining whether the hearing officer's decision was supported by substantial evidence and followed proper procedure. This modernized process provides consistency, transparency, and due process for both residents and park owners alike. So when people talk about rent increases under this ordinance, it's important to understand there are different types of petitions a park owner can file. The two most common are capital improvement petitions and fair return petitions. They serve very different purposes and are often mixed up in public discussion. So capital improvement petition allows a park owner to recover the cost of major upgrades that benefit residents, things like replacing aging sewer lines, resurfacing internal roads, or upgrading water and electrical systems. These aren't routine maintenance costs. They're significant one-time projects that extend the life and safety of the park. If a park owner wants to pass a portion of those costs through to residents, they must file a petition with the city, including detailed documentation of costs, completion dates, and proof of notice. The petition also requires majority consent. At least 51% of occupied spaces in the park must support the improvement. Now, if less than 50% plus one consent, the hearing officer may still approve the request, but only if the improvement was necessary for health and safety reasons. If approved, the rent increase is temporary and amortized over the useful life of the improvement, meaning it expires once the cost has been fully recovered. That ensures residents aren't permanently charged for one-time projects while giving park owners a lawful way to recoup legitimate investments. A fair return petition, sometimes called a reasonable return petition, is entirely different. It exists to keep the ordinance itself constitutional. Courts have ruled, most notably in Yee versus City of Escondido, that while cities may regulate mobile home rents, they must also allow property owners to earn a fair and reasonable return on their investment. If they don't, the law could be considered unconstitutional by way of a taking of private property. The fair return mechanism provides that safeguard. It allows a park owner to apply for an increase if they can demonstrate that their net operating income has fallen below a reasonable threshold compared to a designated base year. This process involves detailed financial analysis, revenues, operating expenses, capital reserves, and inflation adjustments. It's complex and relatively rare. Most rent increase petitions in Calimesa are not fair return cases. They're capital improvement petitions. Still, that fair return section has to remain in the ordinance. Removing it would expose the city to legal challenges because it's what keeps the ordinance from being confiscatory. So right now, there is an active rent increase petition in Calimesa, a capital improvement petition, and it will be reviewed by the hearing officer under the procedures established in Ordinance 410. That means I need to be careful not to comment on the merits of that case or say anything that could bias the process. But what I can do is explain how the ordinance functions because much of the public discussion has centered around misunderstandings. For example, some residents have said the petition should be denied simply because we can't afford it. And that is a heartfelt concern, and it absolutely deserves empathy. But under the law, affordability is not a legal basis for denial. The hearing officer is bound by the findings defined in Chapter 9.05, things like whether the work qualifies as a capital improvement, whether it benefits residents, whether the costs are verified, and whether the petition meets all procedural requirements. Those are the criteria that matter. The ordinance doesn't allow the city or the hearing officer to deny an otherwise valid petition solely because residents can't afford the increase. I know that can be difficult to hear, but it's part of maintaining a fair, consistent, and legally defensible system. Now, some residents may feel that this process only favors the park owner, but in reality, the thing that would favor the park owner the most would be not having a rent stabilization ordinance at all. The ordinance is what creates structure, limits, and accountability. Without it, rent increases would be left entirely to market forces, with no review, no notice requirements, and no cap tied to inflation. So while the process may feel imperfect at times, it's precisely the system that provides protection, predictability, and fairness for everyone involved. Every petition, whether it's a capital improvement, fair return, or maintenance of net operating income petition, follow the same structured procedures set forth in Chapter 8 of the Administrative Rules. Here's how it works in practice. First, There's the filing and review. The park owner files a petition with the city manager's office, verified under penalty of perjury. The rent administrator, in this case the deputy city manager, has the authority under Section 8.4 to review it for completeness, ensure required documentation and notices are included, and coordinate the hearing logistics. Next, there's noticing to residents. Once the petition is deemed complete, notice is mailed to every affected resident along with a summary of the request. Residents then have a period, usually 30 days, to submit written comments, objections, or support statements. Then there's the scheduling of the hearing. Under Section 8.6, the hearing officer conducts the public hearing. The hearing officer receives sworn testimony, evaluates documentary evidence, and applies the ordinance standards to the facts presented. Finally, hearing and decision. Both sides, park owners and residents, may present evidence, call witnesses, and submit exhibits. The hearing officer then issues a written decision, including findings of fact and conclusions of law. The rent administrator ensures compliance with procedure. The hearing officer ensures fairness and evidence-based judgment. If either party disagrees with the outcome, they can appeal to the city council, but that process too is carefully defined. So at a recent meeting, a resident asked how it can be fair when the park owner's attorney has years of experience with mobile home law, while the city's hearing officer may not list the same background online. That's a fair question, and it highlights a common misunderstanding about the hearing officer's role. The hearing officer isn't an attorney for the residents, for the park owner, or even the city. Their job is to act as an independent, neutral decision maker, similar to how a judge functions in a courtroom. And in this regard, the hearing officer does have quite a bit of experience. The administrative rules make this very clear. The hearing officer must carry out all duties impartially and has the authority to administer oaths, control the hearing, rule on evidence, and ensure that the process is fair and orderly for everyone involved. Think of the public hearing not as a city council debate, which is legislative and policy making, but as a quasi-judicial proceeding. The decision must be based entirely on facts and law, not on public opinion or political preferences. So while the park owner may have a private attorney, and residents may also choose to have legal representation or speak on their own behalf, the hearing officer is not anyone's advocate. Their role is to apply Calimesa's ordinance and administrative rules objectively, weigh the evidence, and issue a written decision supported by findings of fact. The hearing officer must also disclose any potential conflicts or prior knowledge of the case, and every witness testifies under oath. Those safeguards ensure transparency and integrity in the process. In simple terms, the park owner presents their case, the residents have equal opportunity to respond, the city manages the procedure through the rent administrator, and the hearing officer, acting as a neutral judge, decides the outcome based solely on the evidence. That's what fairness looks like in the system. It's not about who has the most experience in court, it's about making sure both sides are heard under the same rules and protections. So appeals are governed under Chapter 9 of the Administrative Rules. Under Section 9.5, the City Council's authority on appeal is narrowly focused. It reviews the record to determine whether the hearing officer's decision is supported by substantial evidence and whether the procedures of the ordinance and administrative rules were followed. The council does not rehear the petition, take new testimony, or consider new evidence. Its review is limited to the record created at the hearing. Then, under Section 9.6, the City Council issues its final decision, adopting written findings and providing notice to the parties. That council decision represents the city's final administrative action. This structure keeps the process transparent and legally defensible. Each role is clear in this case. The rent administrator manages procedure, the hearing officer decides based on evidence, and the City Council ensures that the decision was lawful. So a question that comes up frequently is whether the California Department of Housing Community Development, or HCD, oversees mobile home rent stabilization. And the answer is no. HCD regulates mobile home construction, installation, and safety, things like building standards, inspections, and registration. But space rent, the monthly charge for leasing the land, is purely a local matter. The state doesn't require cities to have rate stabilization ordinances. Calimesa chooses to have one, and it's entirely administered by the city. HCD does not oversee our process or intervene in hearings. That distinction matters because it means both responsibility and accountability rest at the local level. So let's clear up a few more misconceptions. First, mobile home rent stabilization isn't the same as apartment rent control. In most mobile home parks, residents own their homes and rent only the land underneath. That unique setup makes them more vulnerable. They can't easily move if space rent becomes unaffordable. Second, mobile homes are often described as affordable housing, but they're not subsidized housing. There's no government funding or tax credit offsetting costs for park owners. These are private businesses operating under local regulation. Third, the city doesn't have unlimited discretion. We can't rewrite the criteria midstream, deny a petition because of public pressure, or approve one out of sympathy. The ordinance provides a clear framework that applies equally to everyone. So the fair return clause is one of the most misunderstood and most essential parts of the ordinance. On the surface, it may sound like a special allowance for park owners, but it's what keeps the ordinance legally enforceable. Courts have consistently held that rent stabilization laws must allow property owners to earn a reasonable return. Without that provision, the ordinance could be invalidated as an unconstitutional taking. The Yee versus City of Escondido decision made that clear at the federal level, and subsequent California cases have reinforced it. That's why Calimesa, like nearly every other city with such an ordinance, includes a fair return process. It's not optional. It's a constitutional safeguard. Now, behind all of these legal and procedural details are real people. Calimesa's mobile home parks are home to longtime residents, retirees, veterans, families who have been here for decades. At the same time, park owners face challenges too: aging infrastructure, increasing insurance costs, and compliance expenses. The ordinance exists to balance those realities. It's designed to provide a fair, predictable process that recognizes both sides. That's why when the city receives petitions, the focus has to remain on evidence and process, not emotion. So when the City Council adopted Ordinance 410, it wasn't changing philosophy. It was modernizing and clarifying the process. Replacing the board with a hearing officer system streamlined the procedure, made it more consistent, and ensured decisions rest on professional expertise. The ordinance also clarified filing timelines, defined what made a petition complete, and established cost recovery provisions that allow either party to seek reimbursement under certain conditions. It made the system fairer and more transparent for everyone involved, residents, owners, and the city alike. So, what can the city do, and what can it do? So the city can administer the ordinance and ensure procedures are followed, verify completeness of petitions and notices, provide a fair, transparent hearing process, and enforce the hearing officer's decision and manage appeals. The city cannot deny a petition simply because residents find it unaffordable, repeal the fair return clause without risking legal exposure, or substitute political preference or public opinion for the findings required by law. Those boundaries keep the ordinance lawful, consistent, and defensible. And look, Calimesa isn't alone. Nearly 100 cities and a dozen counties in California have mobile rent stabilization ordinances. Some go further than ours. Others have repealed theirs. Calimesa's ordinance sits in the middle, protective but practical. It appeals to parks that existed before 1990, respects the rights of both residents and property owners, and includes procedural safeguards that ensure fairness. By keeping the ordinance updated, as we did with Ordinance 410 and the new administrative rules, Calimesa continues to reflect best practices without losing sight of the community's original intent. At the end of the day, Calimesa's mobile home rent stabilization ordinance is about stability and predictability. It ensures residents aren't hit with sudden rent spikes while also ensuring park owners can maintain and improve their properties sustainably. It's a delicate balance, one that requires empathy, patience, and adherence to the law. The city's role isn't to take sides. It's to make sure the process works as intended, following the ordinance, respecting due process, and upholding fairness for everyone. So the next time you hear about a rent stabilization petition or see a post about fair return or capital improvements, I hope this helps clarify what's really at play. It's not about winners or losers. It's about maintaining a lawful, balanced system that protects residents and property owners alike and keeps Calimesa the kind of community where fairness and transparency guide our decisions. Because in the end, that's what good governance is: consistency, clarity, and compassion, even when the issues are complicated. So with that, we will wrap up this episode. Our next City Council meeting, once again, is this Monday, November 3rd at 6 p.m. at the Norton Young Love Senior Center. You can attend live and in person, or you can watch on the city's YouTube page at calimesa.gov/YouTube, and then clicking on the live tab. Make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, or if you prefer the audio version of our podcast, it can be found on all major platforms. Thank you again for joining us. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Take care.